In the world of heroes existed many rules, and also just as many unwritten ones. These rules were mostly based around honor and discipline. Like, if a villain surrendered, it was regarded as dishonorable to continue beating them until knockout. But one of these unwritten edicts was never get hurt to the point where you needed to go to Kuishi Hospital. This rule was established because of you and your quirk. Your power allowed you to heal anyone, with a few exceptions. For example, you could not heal permanent damage like a crippled limb or a severed spine. But flesh wounds, illnesses, even burns or acid injuries were no problem. If this world had been fair to you and your patients, this would be the end of it. You'd be a sought-after doctor, become rich, and single-handedly become the favorite medical practitioner on the planet for the rich, famous, and important. But you weren't, because of one fatal flaw of your quirk. And today, the 23-year-old pro-hero Bakugou Katsuki would experience it firsthand. It was 5 p.m. when a single, simple grocery store robber got a lucky shot on him. The criminal didn't even have a quirk, and this guy, this little rat, managed to hit the pro into one of his vital organs. The emergency responders quickly realized that if they would not get him to Kuishi Hospital, the young pro, who practically just started his career, would perish within the next 2 hours from internal bleeding. Going in and out of conscious during the ride, one of the responders joked. "Little early for a guy like this to go there, huh?" The other snorted but put up a hand. "Be professional." Bakugou had heard whispered rumors that in all honesty he didn't really care about. His pride forbid him to acknowledge the possibility of ever being hit. Bakugou's entire body was screaming with pain, and he was breathing quick, panicked breaths. And then he blinked. He could swear it was only for a second. But it was as if he had been teleported. He found himself strapped down in a sterile-looking operation room. He was still in immense pain, and movement hurting more than 1,000 needles. But also, Katsuki could feel his life slipping. He was getting weaker by the second. You had been sitting in your office chewing on a pastry when your emergency beeper went off. Immediately rushed to grab it. A code appeared on the small screen. Emergency surgery. While most doctors or surgeons went through medical school, had degrees, were making a lot of money, you weren't. In fact, up until that one time your quirk went off by accident during an incident, you had with your car. You had hit a child. You lived a fairly boring life. Hell, you had been living in your parents' apartment and worked at the local Fry Me Taco. To your understanding, your quirk was nothing good. Up until that day. Making you probably the least trained doctor in Japan, while at the same time also one of the best and feared. Not knowing really how hurt your next patient would be, upon arriving, you ran as fast as your little legs could. Seeing you rush past a few of your now colleagues, a few snickered and whispered, one clearly saying, "Ah, that poor bastard." By now you understood that that wasn't directed at you, but whoever was unfortunate enough to be a patient. You barged into your emergency room with a heavily beating heart and completely out of breath. Girls as little as you just weren't made for running. You should ask your boss to put your main office closer to here. The sanitized room was empty, save for your tools on a metal table and a really, really hot guy in a hero costume strapped down on a stretcher in the middle. Quickly you approached, greeting him with a quick hi and an introduction to your name. Confused, the hero looked at you, barely able to lift a finger. Why were you so cheery? It concerned him. You blinked. Okay, you said. You clapped your hands together. You're probably wondering why you're here without any nurses or trained professionals. And most importantly, why you're not sedated. Your sweet smile disgusted him for some reason. That's because of me. You closed your eyes and tilted your head. Judging by how pale you are, your breathing, and that glare, really scary glare, I might add, you're going to die in about 5 to 10 minutes. So this gives me just about 4 minutes to talk to you so you don't worry. Who are you? He coughed. You furrowed your brows. Did he already forget your name? Did he have brain damage? Would be a shame if a guy as hot as him would have brain damage, because that would be something you could not help with. Do you mean my name, or who I am as to why a completely unprofessional ditzy idiot is standing before you in what most likely looks to you like the basement of a serial killer? He didn't answer, just glared. You clapped your hands excitedly. Well, my dear patient, I'm about to show you why. Heroes really don't want to get hurt like you nowadays. And also why the death rate of heroes in Japan has dropped by a few %. It really only dropped by 1%. After all, it was just one hospital in one district of a large city. And one untrained health professional. I'm a support hero, you know? You giggled. This was your favorite part. Trauma loop. That's my hero name. My quirk, Archon Grid, allows me to essentially save people from dying. You walked over to the metal table. There your tools were neatly lined up. Some of them quite common for a hospital. Others, not. A beautiful power drill looked at you funny. Taking it, you took it for a spin. This will do. With your other hand, you grabbed a scalpel and walked over to him. My quirk is a sociopath's wet dream. Or worse, nightmare, depending on the type of sociopath you are. Looking at your tools, his eyes widened in horror. Without further warning, you cut the scalpel around his wound. The beeper said bullet wound, so might as well try and get that out. The hero screamed, a blood-curdling scream, and a few spritzers of blood were hitting your face. Oops, probably hit a few organs. Sorry, you said. Finally, you felt resistance. Oh, got it! Please don't be a bone, you said as you pulled the tiny metal object out of him, and simply throwing it on the ground. Now, you might think you're going to die in about a minute or two, right? He didn't answer, and you reached for the power drill. Well, some of my patients say they would have rather died. Hey, can I ask you something? His eyes focused on you. When this is over, wanna go on a date? He didn't reply. How could he? And you shrugged. I'll just remind you. Now, open wide, you said as you opened his mouth with your free hand, and turned on the power drill. Bakugou's screams echoed through the entire hallway your operation room was in. After you are done destroying his mouth with the drill, you are taking some pliers, making sure he saw them. Through trial and error, you had discovered that the act of removing one's fingernails was quite grueling. Carelessly, you shoved the metal object under his nails, blood spewing from under them as soon as you did so. It was funny. The only thing you truly hated about your job was how numb you'd become to other people's suffering. Your quirk, Archon Grid, was a macabre joke of nature. It allowed you to heal all wounds on a person, as long as they were fatal and the person was as close to death as possible. This made your quirk inconvenient for healing smaller wounds. While Bakugou was going to die, the pain this wound inflicted, it simply was not enough. Luckily for him, your quirk prevented death as well, as long as the pain you inflicted was at a steady stream. It was as if your quirk was a separate entity that liked inflicting pain on others, and it simply decided at some point on a whim when a person suffered enough, and then, as a joke, just healed them. This is why your hero name was Trauma Loop. You inflicted traumas on your patients, who due to their occupation would most likely end up in your care over and over through the course of their career. At first, you had hated your quirk. It disgusted you, and you didn't know how to properly use it. But eventually, you enjoyed it. No two heroes were the same. It was like a puzzle. In fact, there was this one hero, a slime mutation quirk thing, who despite being a slime still had a skeleton and organs swimming around inside him. You brought him into your healing threshold by simply putting paint thinner and bleach into his slimy body. Eventually, even Bakugou's resistance was broken. The man was just staring at the ceiling. You took a step back. Maybe you overdid it a little. But then, his body began to glow, light emitting through the countless wounds he had over his body. You clapped your hands excitedly, grinning from ear to ear. His body began to emit disgusting, wet noises and crushing sounds. As his body rearranged. And then, just as quick as it had begun, it was over. The entire room and your clothes were covered in an endless flow of red, with the exception of your patient. He was healed. You skipped closer to him. Did I promise too much? You asked. He looked around himself. Bakugou never felt better. It was a feeling like waking up from a very long nightmare, only to then realize you were in a mansion with a money pool and 10 naked supermodels in your bed, ready to follow your every order. How oddly specific, he thought. He looked at you in disbelief. Just 10 seconds ago, he had given up on life. Don't worry, PTSD should only hit you whenever you see a hospital or get injured. He exhaled. You tilted your head. I don't... He was feeling so excited he could barely talk. When you put that drill in my mouth, I wanted to rip your throat out. You shrugged. I hear that a lot. I can imagine. You put a hand on your chin and smiled as you leaned on the operation table next to his face. You're taking this quite well. I'm proud of you. I have a lot of questions. Go ahead. He leaned his head back, staring at the ceiling. It's embarrassing. This happened before. He was a guy after all. Oh, you're wondering why your dick is so hard? His eyes widened. Don't worry, you're not a masochist now. That feeling of being healed, that's it. I should leave in about 10 minutes. He looked away. What? He huffed. Come on, I'm covered in your gore. One particularly previous patient, some handsome, sadly married pervert with balls for hair, had that same facial expression after you healed him. Tell you what, you whispered into his ear as you took your gloves off. You take me out on a date, and I take care of that for you. His head turned to face you. You could tell by his twitching mouth that he knew he should decline, but his monkey brain refused to say the magic word. Instead, he simply said, You mean it? Without answering him, your hand snaked towards his groin where his tent stood. It was hospital policy you weren't allowed to take off pants or do anything to the genital area after another hero, some mutation quirk user with pink skin, complained you shoved nails up her. Don't worry, I'll be gentle, you whispered.